The latest Public Service Commission report has raised concerns about corruption and patronage in the civil service. It focuses on three issues: ethical leadership, payment of service providers by public entities, and some of the general grievances that have been raised around the public service. We're joined by Public Service Commissioner Dr. Somadoda Fikeni. Dr. Fikeni, good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time tonight. Firstly, let's talk about these three categories that you, as the Public Service Commission, have put together. I mean, these are the three headline issues, but I think there are two or three other issues that you touch on in the quarterly report. What informed the focus on these issues?
Well, I do think that the issue of ethical leadership has come to be the most important factor, because the unethical conduct is now reflected in commissions of inquiry in court cases, even more recently in the public protection equipment scandals. And in most of these instances, it shows the utter disregard of the values of the Constitution and what public service ought to do in upholding those particular values. It also shows the disregard of many other regulations, such as your public, PFMA. That in itself is to us the matter of grave concern. That's why Public Service Commission is now emphasizing a value-based to balance the rules-based approach to public service, because it is clear that we have some of the best systems, except that people are not adhering to them, and leaders in those roles are not actually even taking these seriously, and there is no consequence management in the main. And the second part...
Sure. No, continue.
Yes. The second part is that small businesses primarily depend on the payments on time, because they have little or no credit to stand on. So when there is non-payment of the suppliers, it affects them the most, and yet they are so crucial in the economic growth and even transformation of the economic sector. And that is where the majority of black people are actually concentrated in the main. So when you have non-payment on time, it leads to many of these businesses closing and shutting down, which is a contradiction to the very government policy to actually enable these small businesses to grow. And it's a contradiction that works against black economic empowerment and many other policies. So that in itself is yet another challenge. Of course, grievances do show a pattern of issues that people are raising, whether it's whistleblowers or people from within departments who are not, receiving any comfort in their cases being resolved internally. And that in itself points to the internal systems that are not working, or simply disregard of policies which are there.
Dr. Fikeni, on the issue of ethical leadership, the report has highlighted that corruption and a huge burden to dealing with corruption in the public services, because you have a high number of officials who are doing work with the state. Now, the legislation has been tightened. I wonder what work has been done to verify the extent to which public service officials are not or continue to do work with the state.
Public Service Commission continue to do investigations into that, and we have issued reports to various departments to say we see that this number of officials are doing business with the state or are not disclosing their own interests. And that in itself, it will depend on those departments coming forward, showing leadership in making sure that they make this compliance a reality. And also there are consequences for those who do not heed the call. And we also submit these reports to Parliament to make sure that the portfolio committees and Parliament at large is able to use this as a tool for oversight, because it's scientific, it's verifiable, and therefore they can take on these departments. And as far as we're concerned, even performance agreements of senior managers ought to depend on how they take these issues seriously, and there is consequence management, or else the patronage networks and the utter disregard of the constitutional values and even the policies of the country are the ones which makes this institutional culture of corruption, of impunity and immunity to lead us to where we are at this particular moment, where in some instances services are not getting to the people, or people get services and sometimes they are expected to grease the palms. That's helping corruption to say, to pay me earlier, you'll have to give me something. Whereas it is the policy, and it is there written clearly in the Public Management Finance Act, that people or the suppliers should be paid within 30 days.
And that's often the difficulty, right? That, not only sometimes is there a lack of consequence management, but where there are officials who are corrupt, it means that the likes of the service providers that you are pushing, to be paid within the set time, that kind of behavior also continues, because officials want more out of the deal than what they are actually entitled to, because they should just be focusing on doing their jobs and not trying to get money out of service providers.
That is precisely the point, Kathy, to say once you allow the weakening of the institutions of the state over time through this unethical behavior and patronage networks, then corruption becomes the major transaction point. That does not condemn other public service who are doing their work and trying to do good. But it is quite clear from the Pulse or the Public Service Commission report that this culture of disregard of rules is actually beginning to overwhelm the system to a point where services which are supposed to be rendered to people, payments which are supposed to be made, are not made. But that is also a consequence where people sometimes are deployed or appointed because of loyalty instead of competence. Hence, that professionalization of public service document, if implemented and followed, it is likely to eliminate many of these anomalies and unethical behavior.
Let's leave it there for tonight. That was Public Service Commissioner Dr. Somadoda Fikeni.